Hello everybody and welcome to part 19 of Kerbal Space Program, The Journey Continues. Last episode saw the return of our interplanetary craft, the Galileo, where it docked with our new space station, the Socrates, and today we are continuing our efforts to get it turned around and ready for its next mission. To that end, we have launched one of our Brunel Mark II rockets. Its crew today is Jebediah, Bill and Bob, who have fully rested and recuperated after returning from their trip to Eve, and are ready for active service again. This mission is basically just a carbon copy of the penultimate mission from the last episode. Underneath that fairing, we have precisely 1 metric buttload of fuel, and we're going to take that up and continue to fill the Galileo's tanks. And we need to get a move on because we now have a definite date for the Galileo's next mission. So, following on from what I was saying last episode, I've checked the numbers, and after its recent engine upgrade, the Galileo will now definitely have enough Delta V to reach Moho. Moho's the first transfer window that opens up for us. It's quite handy that that's the first one for reasons we'll get into later in the episode. But that takes place in a little over 100 days, and we want the Galileo ready and waiting for it. So with the Galileo off to Moho, that means that when its sister ship, the Ptolemy, returns to Kerbin, and once we've got it serviced and turned around, we'll be sending that off to Dres, and once that's all done and dusted, that will mean we have 2 of our 3 remaining objectives for this series ticked off the list, with only a landing on Eve remaining. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First things first, we need to get this craft refueled. So our crew, having arrived at the Socrates, begins the delicate task of bringing its quite heavy payload into dock with the station's multi-purpose docking node. With that securely attached, it's time to get on with the relatively straightforward task of transferring all that fuel across. We fill up the Galileo's second tank, we nearly fill up that last big tank as well. We're about 1,000 units of liquid fuel short, but we need to do another fuel lift anyway just to finish off the monopropellant and the fuel oxidizer anyway, so it's not really a big problem. We can get that next time. Anyway, with their mission complete and with nothing else really to hang around for, it's time for our intrepid trio to head for home. Once again, I'm going to try and land this as close as I can to the KSC. Once again, it's not that much more successful than previous attempts, but I'm going to keep plugging away at it regardless. I think now we just need the 2 more lifts to get the Galileo ready to go again. 1 for the remaining fuel, as I said, and 1 to bring up the mission vehicle. I'm not including the 1 to bring the crew up, of course. We'll do that at a later date. We're probably going to be sending the 4 orange suits again, and I think they've probably seen enough of deep space for the time being. We'll go a little easy on them for the moment. Our mission ends with our Kerbals splashing down into Kerbin's oceans, and having made plenty of adjustments, this time we are ever so slightly closer to the KSC than we have been on previous attempts. Never mind, let's move on. So, to finish the refuelling then, we are blasting off from the KSC with one of our Brunel Mark I rockets, the lighter option this time. No need to break out the big guns on this occasion. We can comfortably lift the remaining fuel with this craft. With a full load of fuel before the engine upgrade and with a mission vehicle attached, I think the interplanetary craft had, somewhere between 8 and 9,000 metres per second of Delta V. After the upgrade, that's gonna be somewhere between 12,000 and 13,000. Not quite the dramatic increase I was hoping for, but it'll certainly do the job. It'll certainly get us to Moho and back. Yeah, the Delta V margins for this mission are going to be a lot tighter than they have been with our other missions. I mean, for the Galileo, but especially for our landing craft. To land on Moho and get back into orbit, I think the recommended amount of Delta V is 3,000 metres per second. We're going to have 2.5. It can be done, but we are going to have to be very, very careful when we do so. The Delta V margins are going to be razor thin. I did consider going for an upgraded lander, a bulked-up lander, just give it a bit more Delta V, but of course that would mean more mass as a payload, and that would impact the Delta V of the Galileo itself, getting to and from Moho. And I think that's where most of our unplanned losses of Delta V are going to come from in that journey. As I said, provided we're very careful, I think it's going to be easier to keep the lander within a tight Delta V margin than it is the Galileo, so that's the plan for the time being. Anyway, arriving at the space station, our Kerbals find themselves on the night side of Kerbin, so we time accelerate into some sunlight, and then we can think about getting this payload docked. The easiest to reach docking port from where we are is on the side of the Galileo itself, so we decide we're going to park there today. So having docked, it's time to transfer that fuel. We only need about 1,000 units of liquid fuel to fill up the last of the Galileo's main tanks. One of those 9-ton fuel oxidizer mix containers fills up the rearmost tank, and then we just need to transfer across about 500 units of monopropellant. I have been topping up the Galileo's monopropellant tank, just if any missions that came up here had any spare, I'd just chuck that in there. So we didn't need to bring up a full tank, but we had the spare payload capacity and I couldn't be bothered to faff around with that, so a full tank is what we've brought. So with another job well done, it is time for us to depart the space station, for our crew of Valentina, Erison and Grados to head back to the surface, and for me to once again try and plant the backside of the command module as squarely as possible onto the KSC. I make some more adjustments to our approach, but this time we're even further away than we were on the previous occasion, so I don't know, half of me wants to just give up on this, the other half just wants to keep going until I nail it, and then probably give up. But anyway, the Galileo is nearly ready to go, we just need to launch one more mission to get it there. So let's get cracking then. We are blasting off once again from the KSC, this time with one of our Mark III shuttles. Greyfried, Bill, Bob and Corkin are the crew for this one. In the cargo bay of the shuttle at the moment, we have our lander for the Galileo. Now we're taking it up fully fueled, so this is a pretty heavy lift for our shuttle. So we've put a little bit of extra fuel into the cargo bay as well, just to make sure we can get to the space station and back without any real problems. Now this lander is almost identical to the one that's currently with the Ptolemy, but there's a slight difference. This one has a couple of radiators, just to help it deal with the extreme heats it might have to face on a mission down to Moho. This is why I said earlier that it's kind of good that the Moho window came up first, because we can just send up a modified lander and get the Galileo on its way. If the Dres window came up first, we'd have had to have sent the Galileo off to that, and then when the Ptolemy gets back, have to faff about with upgrading the lander on that. This way we can just send one up and everything's done. Come to think of it, I'm not sure how much action this lander is actually going to see. We'll try to send it down a couple of times to Moho, but apart from that, I don't think it's going to have anything else to do with this series. It won't be going down to Eve. We're going to need something a bit more purpose-built for that. And that will be all of the series objectives ticked off. So unless we do a follow-up series where we go to Jool and to Elu and we use the lander for that, then this may well be a one-use vehicle. Arriving at the space station, we once again find ourselves in darkness, so once again we time accelerate into a bit of daylight, and then we can start the process of docking. We bring the shuttle into dock on the end of the docking arm where I was going to park the Ptolemy if it arrived before the Galileo had left, but that's no longer going to be an issue. And it is pretty ideally placed for us to do the rest of this mission. With the shuttle safe and secure, we crack open our cargo bay and we can take a look at our new lander. As I said, it's exactly the same as the old one, just with a couple of radiators on the side. And Corkin Kerman is going to transfer across and start the delicate process of trying to manoeuvre this thing out of the cargo bay with that extra fuel tank not really helping the matter. Having cleared the cargo bay, docking this thing onto the front of the Galileo is child's play by comparison. So we get that securely attached, we top up the monopropellant, we transfer Corkin back across, and finally the Galileo is ready to go. So with that, our Kerbals can begin to make their way home, and all of our missions so far today have been going pretty well. The business end of them has gone pretty well. The journeys home, not quite so much, and sadly this one is no exception. As we were approaching the KSC, I thought we were bleeding off too much speed, so I lowered the nose and either I was mistaken originally or I lowered the nose too much, but whatever the cause, we go shooting straight past our target. We get ourselves turned around, we do have a little bit of fuel, but it's nowhere near enough to get ourselves back to the KSC. It's just about enough, however, to get us to the KSC island. This is a very short runway, so there's no room for error. We touch down, we apply the brakes, I even have to fire up the RCS thrusters to try and slow us down a bit quicker. But we do manage to stop with very little room to spare, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is the very first time I have touched down on the KSC island following a mission to space. Moving on. Moving on about 90 days, in fact. Yes, we fast-forwarded until we're about 10 days away from the Galileo's transfer window opening up, but before we get down to all that, there's just one small thing we need to take care of. Our brand new orbital science lab is, for the first time, full of science, 2,000 points worth in fact, and we need to transmit that back down to the surface so our lab can resume its activities. Now, this new lab has proved to be a hungry and efficient beast. It's nearly all the way through all the experiments we have up here. We're probably going to have to launch another experiment gathering mission, probably to Minmus before the Ptolemy gets back. And then when the Ptolemy does arrive, I think, unlike with the Galileo, where we left all the repeat experiments up here and took the rest down, I think we're probably going to do things the other way around. Take the repeat experiments down and leave the bulk of it up here for the science lab to process, because it has been chewing through those experiments at quite a rate. Anyway, with all that science transmitted back to the KSC, we can go and spend some of it. There's nothing specific we want at the moment, but as I've mentioned a few times, I'm trying to work my way through this tech tree one tier at a time, and well, we now have enough science to fill out the rest of that 9th tier, so we may as well go ahead and do that. So we've picked up some interesting tech. As I said, nothing we need to use immediately, although I'm sure we'll get round to looking at some of those parts in due course. That 10th tier, though, does contain some very interesting parts, although that will have to wait for the moment. We have to leave our hard-won science gains to the side for a moment, though, because with the departure of the Galileo imminent, it's time for us to take up its crew. Corkin and Erison are in control of the latest iteration of our spaceplane, and their passengers for today are, of course, Jebediah, Valentina, Bill and Bob. So this latest version of our spaceplane contains a few obvious revisions. It's bigger, it's got more fuel, and we've swapped out those liquid core engines for the basic stock nuclear engine instead. I was doing some research on spaceplanes. I found I was being far too conservative with the mass of this thing, so we've chucked on some extra stuff, and now we have a craft that can reach orbit with a very healthy amount of Delta V remaining. I have done a full test run of this iteration off camera, and for this run I was trying something a little bit different. I was experimenting, trying a different descent profile. It doesn't really work. At one point we almost lose control, but I get it back. But that does cost us in terms of our Delta V once we get to orbit. Not dangerously slow. We've still got more than enough to get to the space station and back. But hey, the whole thing's a learning process, isn't it? On that first test run, we got this craft into orbit with a small payload in its cargo bay, with about 2,100 meters per second of Delta V to spare, a little over. So this craft is certainly getting a lot closer to where we need it to be, but I'm sure there's still room for improvement. Anyway, arriving at the space station, I misjudged the point at which we need to start our rendezvous burn. These nuclear engines take a little longer to get up to full power than I appreciated, and we have what I think could reasonably be described as a close shave. As in, one more coat of paint on this shuttle and we would have been in trouble. No harm done though, so we get ourselves turned around, we close the distance once again, and we bring ourselves into dock with the station's main docking node there. We transfer the crew across, and with that, the Galileo is ready to depart the space station. The hardware's up there, the fuel's up there, the crew's up there, but before we get round to that, there's just the small matter of making sure that Corkin and Erison make it back down to Kerbin safely. So the crew of our shuttle say their farewells, depart the space station, and start making plans for their deorbit burn, because I would really like to get at least one mission landing back at the KSC this episode. Having pumped some fuel around, the craft handles very well on its descent. We get a good approach, maybe coming in a little too fast, but we manage to bleed off any excess speed, and before too long we are, thankfully, making a decent landing back on the KSC runway. Back in space, and it is now time for the Galileo to depart the Socrates. Our crew of Valentina, Jebediah, Bill and Bob are off once again to set foot on a brand new world. We've already sent a gravity probe to Moho, so the science rewards won't be quite as great as some other missions, but I'm sure the bounty will nonetheless be plentiful. I will be doing my normal trick here. We'll be raising the orbit of the Galileo up to what I think is a decent point to make our transfer burn from. In this case, it's going to be about 1,000 kilometers, and then we'll be chucking up a Brunel Mark 1 just to top up those fuel tanks. With our missions to Ike and to Eve, that topping up wasn't quite so vital, but as I mentioned, the Delta V margins on this mission are very slim indeed, so yeah, I think we're going to need it. On leaving the space station, our delta V readout showed about 10,500 meters per second of delta V. Well below what I was mentioning earlier, but about halfway through this mission, we are going to lose quite a lot of mass in the form of lander fuel. So that's where my initial estimate came from, and we're still roughly on course for that. I am getting a little bit twitchy about the delta V situation here, but I do have contingency plans just in case the fuel doesn't stretch as far as I think it's going to, so we should be fine. Anyway, with the Galileo parked in our desired orbit, that is where we are going to leave things for today. I do hope you've enjoyed it, everybody. If you have, please consider liking, subscribing, following me on Twitter, link in the description. I will be back soon to continue our journey. Oh God, I've just made myself cringe. Anyway, thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you next time.